Oh, hello. I'm reading some awesome magazines that I found in my Commodore 64 lot. Very interesting articles, cool artwork going into all the game advertisements in these magazines, and very interesting also to see how much things cost back then. So if you want to check out some print from magazines of that era, stay tuned and watch this video. And doesn't it look like Eli Manning traveled back in time to advertise some word processing software? Nah. Well, maybe. Hey guys, Brendan here, aka Mr. Weaverface, and this is part 2 of my video series relating to that Epic Commodore 64 haul that I got recently. I have a lot more stuff to show you, like boxed video games, but for now I'm going to just give you a sample and a taste of all the awesome Commodore 64 magazines that I found in that lot. I found over 150 magazines, stuff from Ahoy, Compute's Gazette, Run Magazine, Commodore World, an obscure one called DieHard that I never heard about. Not going to show you every single magazine, but just going to show you some advertisements, some awesome ads for video games of that era, how much things cost back then. Very cool stuff to look at. And if you loved reading those magazines from back in the day, this is going to be a little bit of nostalgia for you. So if you're interested in that, follow me. Let's go take a look.
Alright, here you can see Run Magazine. This is the premiere issue from January 1984. This magazine series pretty much jumped out at me because the guy had all of these magazines organized in binders by date, and I'm pretty sure that he has the full run of Run Magazine. If you had a Commodore 64 magazine subscription back in the day, you always remembered all the code that was written in the back of those magazines. Now, if you were lucky enough to get the subscription that came with the disc with all those programs on it, you were lucky, but for the most of us, we usually got the subscription without the disc, so that meant we had to type in hours and hours upon code if we wanted to use that favorite utility or game that we saw advertised in the magazine. Another thing that you may remember from all these magazines are all the advertisements by software and hardware companies in the United States, advertising all their deals at reduced prices in order to get you to buy their products. I never bought anything from these magazines, but it was cool to look at the prices back then and make your little wish list of stuff that you want to buy. But I mean, look at that. Commodore 64 dot matrix printer, $275. I mean, you can buy a great printer for less than $100 these days, but pretty cool to see what the prices are of the hardware and software back then. Run Magazine did a pretty good job with their game reviews. Here's a review of Lode Runner, which you may remember playing, and I included a bit of the article to show the prices of the game when it came out back then. The disc version was about $35 and the cartridge version was about $40, and if you take inflation into account, by today's standards, that would cost about $91. So you can see that the price that we're paying for games today, for brand new games, is still pretty respectable. Here's a review for Hard Hat Mac. This game made by Electronic Arts. I remember playing this game a lot. A cool platforming game, lots of fun. Another game that came out back then was Jumpman. I don't remember playing that game a lot, but I remember playing Jumpman Jr., which is pretty much the same. Again, a platforming game, lots of fun. What can I say about summer games other than this game was amazing? If that reviewer of this game did not give it an A, I was going to give him a beatdown 30 years later. This game is amazing. So many different events to master, to beat the world record, and then to keep beating your own records to improve upon the score for each event. Very worthwhile playing, and if you have not played this game yet and you don't own a Commodore 64, check it out on an emulator. It's really awesome. When I saw this game review for Ghostbusters for the Commodore, I had to include it because I love the Ghostbusters through and through. I remember as a kid wanting to grow up to be a Ghostbuster, making my own proton pack out of a cardboard box and some tin cans and spray painting that one year for Halloween. I was a little disappointed to find out that it wasn't a real job as I got older, but I got over it. But as far as the game's concerned, when I was a kid, I didn't have an original version. I had a copied game, so it was a little hard for me back then to figure out what to do. But once you figure out the main concept of the game, busting ghosts to make money, to decrease the PKE levels as much as possible, it was very fun to play, very satisfying to get past the Marshmallow Man to defeat Gozer at the end of the game. Also, one of the first games for the Commodore that used voice synthesis in its games. Run Magazine had a section where readers could actually submit their own tips relating to certain games or programs for the Commodore 64, or programming tips as well. And based on how valuable the Run Magazine editors thought those tips were, they would use a scaled approach and give tips of lower value a lower amount of money, but tips of high value much more money. So if you had a really good tip, you can make some money entering your tip to Run Magazine. Here are just a few attachments that were available for the Commodore 64. If you were into programming back then, you could actually make your own cartridges with this neat little attachment. Also, if you wanted to watch TV but you did not want to leave your chair while using the Commodore 64, you could get this tuner to attach to your Commodore 64 monitor to turn it into a TV. And finally, evidently the Commodore 64 disk drive had some heat problems, not unlike some hardware of recent days, Xbox 360. But you could actually get this cooler to cool off your disk drive while booting up your latest game. Now, just to show you a few ads for games back then, here's Zaxxon by Synapse. Also, Night Mission Pinball, an awesome game I remember playing by Sublogic. And if you played a Commodore, you hopefully played Impossible Mission. Awesome game. And once again, Ghostbusters, awesome ad showing the Ghostbusters from the movie. Beachhead 2, played this game a lot too, awesome war game. Skyfox, also a very cool flying fighter game. The Bard's Tale, a classic RPG for the Commodore. And some classic Lucasfilm games. Here's ones for Coronis Rift, and also Rescue on Fractalis. And finally, an awesome RPG as well, Fantasy 2. Here is the stack of Ahoy magazines that I found in the lot. Ahoy magazine was a magazine I remember reading as a kid, owning my Commodore 64. I do remember going to the bookstores at the mall back in the day and buying this magazine. It was really cool, had good game reviews in it, and like the other magazines, they had programs in the back that you could type up. But if you were lucky, again, to get the subscription that came with the discs, as you can see, it cost a lot more compared to just the magazine-only subscription. But if you did get the subscription with the discs, all the awesome programs are already on it, and you can just load them up and go right to town. And here's an advertisement for probably one of the earliest forms of sex chatting online, Sex Text, $12.95 lifetime membership. Wonderful. And here's an ad for The Gambler. Buy a program for $75 plus pay extra money to get the stats each week to enter into the program, and you may or may not win more money. Ahoy also had a feature where you could buy back issues, which was nice because this was before the internet. So if you missed a magazine and you didn't have a subscription and there was a game from that magazine that you wanted, unless your friend typed it up or had the disc, there was really no way of getting it unless you got that back issue. Ahoy had some good reviews in their magazine. Here's a screen that I remember very well for Quantum Link. If you owned a Commodore and had a 300 baud modem, you knew that screen very well. And also here's a review for Impossible Mission 2. I remember playing this game a little bit, but definitely seemed a lot more advanced and complicated than the first in the series. Ahoy also had a dedicated section for people who are into the artwork aspect of the Commodore 64, so people could submit their best work into Ahoy to be included on a gallery disc that people could buy from Ahoy. And I guess if they sold so many discs and they used your image, you could actually get royalties from the sales of those discs. And now just a few game advertisements from Ahoy magazine. Here's one for Pirates, a Swashbuckling Adventure. And oh man, how I wished I owned this game, but look at that awesome advertisement for the very first Ultima game. That is amazing. Here's an advertisement for Ultima I, came out later obviously, but look at that artwork for the ad. That is so cool. And then here also game by Data East, Platoon, based on the movie. The next magazine that was in the lot was Compute. There was probably about 20 magazines in the lot, and from reading through the magazines, I'm finding out that it's not like a gaming magazine. It's more geared for people into programming and stuff like that. Compute did have some good articles in it, however. Here's one for popular bulletin boards that were available back in the day. And quite frankly, there are bulletin boards still available now, so if that kind of stuff suits you, I'm pretty sure you can find one to log on to for some nostalgia's sake. Also, they had some good buyer guides in Compute. Here's one that's available for music software to use the awesome SID chip in the Commodore, and also reviews of programs and video games for the Commodore back then. Now here's the Compute's Gazette. Now this magazine was pretty much a little bit more geared towards the gamer, so a lot more game reviews, a lot more advertisements for games in this magazine compared to its counterpart Compute. Ooh, Commodore 64 versus Nintendo, readers speak out. Oh, well, we all know who won that battle. And now some ads from Compute's Gazette. Here's Telling Guard, a very cool dungeon crawler RPG. And some games from SSI, Wizard's Crown and Rings of Zilfin. I mean, look at the artwork in that advertisement, very cool. And here's an ad for the latest titles that came out from Broderbund, and some very cool arcade ports for the Commodore 64. As you saw in my last pickup video, I got Tapper and Congo Bongo, but Zaxxon and Spy Hunter are also very cool games that came out for the Commodore 64. And here's just a couple advertisements for some hardware that were featured in Compute's Gazette. Here's one for a 10 megabyte hard disk drive, $1,600. I mean, that's expensive by today's standards. Imagine how much it was expensive for back then. And also what's called the Spartan, made by Mimic. Back then it was for about $600. I saw one recently sold lately on eBay for around $800-900. What it did was emulate an Apple II Plus computer, so you added this to your Commodore 64, you could play Commodore and Apple II games. Really awesome. Now here's a Commodore magazine that I never heard about before. This one's called DieHard, and it came out in 1992. This is the first issue that you're seeing right here. And as you are all well aware, the Commodore 64 golden years were pretty much in the 1980s, so this magazine came out much later after the popularity of the Commodore 64 came and went. As you can see here, it looks pretty much like a newsletter. The early issues of the magazines pretty much had a colored piece of paper for the cover, and then pretty much typed print on the inside. But that, as the magazine progressed, you can see some nice glossy covers here with some dedicated artwork to make it look nice and fancy. And this magazine, not much of a gamer magazine, but definitely tailored towards those Commodore 64 people who are mostly into the programming aspect of the Commodore 64. The next pile of magazines that I found in that Commodore 64 lot was called Commodore World. Never really read the magazine as a kid, and probably because it's more geared towards the programmer or the techie, it really wasn't into games. But they had some cool articles in there. I actually learned a lot about the bankruptcy proceedings of Commodore and how Commodore pretty much became non-existent. Very sad story, but it was very good to read for a historical perspective. Here's a segment called On the Horizon with a little bit of tips of stuff coming out. And they did a little bit with game reviews. I mean, they even call it mini views. Not too much color in the magazine to really make the review stand out, and obviously not too much emphasis put on game reviews there. Thank you for bearing with me on this Commodore 64 magazine retrospective. The last stack of magazines that were in the lot was Commodore Microcomputers. Now this magazine was great. A lot of good tech stuff, but a lot of good game stuff as well. I was very fortunate to find the Best of 1985 Collector's Edition issue in there. Really cool to look through to see what was the thing to have in 1985 for the Commodore. Commodore Microcomputer magazine, that was more geared for the tech and programming side. Its brother or sister magazine, if you will, the Commodore Power Play, that was definitely geared more towards the gamer. And this magazine had the best game reviews out of all the magazines that I went through so far. So this was definitely like Commodore's version of Nintendo Power for the Nintendo. Here's a review for Coronis Rift, Lucasfilm's game by Epic. Very cool review showing a screenshot and the price. Right on Bungling Bay, I included this because this game was a great game that I remember playing for the Commodore 64, flying around and destroying stuff. And I really don't need to say anything else about Impossible Mission, but here's a review for it. Really awesome game. Again, if you haven't played it, please go check it out. And also very cool articles in the Commodore Power Play. Here's a really cool, colorful article describing when Commodore launched the Amiga. And compact discs, the next revolution, if they only knew. Was it really that hard to use a regular hole punch to use on your floppy disk in order to be able to use the second side? Well, if so, I mean, I don't remember any problems, but here you could buy the official 5 1/4 inch diskette hole punch. Boom! And finally, just wanted to show you a few more game advertisements that were in Commodore Power Play. Here's one for ROADWAR 2000, as well as some other games by SSI. Here's one for Heroes of the Lance, an Advanced Dungeons and Dragons game, more of a side-scrolling adventure. Here's one, Outrun by Sega. I played this game tons and tons of times in the arcade. Very fun to play, and the Commodore 64 port was very fun as well. Here's another advertisement for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons games, showing a few gold box games there on the right. A game I'm playing right now on the Commodore 64, Quest Drawn 2, very cool game I'm playing. And Demon Stalkers, very similar to Gauntlet, but from the people who have played it, they said it's definitely more advanced and definitely more fun than Gauntlet. The Infinity Machine, something I'm going to show you in a future episode, kind of like the Game Genie for the Commodore 64. And finally, a bunch of Mastertronic games for a very good deal.
That was a lot of cool stuff in those magazines. I enjoyed making my coffee from my Keurig and just sipping that while leafing through those old vintage magazines. A lot of those magazines were almost 30 years old already, believe it or not. And I took pictures of the highlights, so you saw the ads, you saw the articles, and how much things cost back then. No wonder I had a lot of copied games. I mean, things were expensive even in the 80s at that time. And also the peripherals for the Commodore 64 that I had no idea existed. I mean, I was just a kid back in the day, so I was pretty oblivious to a lot of the cool stuff that they had out for the Commodore 64. The next video is going to be the final video. It's going to be part 3 of my Commodore 64 pickup, and that's going to save the best stuff for last. I'm going to show you a lot of games that came with manuals and a lot of games that came in box. Just to show you a couple real quickly. If you had a Commodore, you know the word Zork. Zork 1, and this is Zork 2 that was in there. Awesome stuff. And I did not know that there was a Turtles, the arcade game for the Commodore 64, and that was in the lot. Also, if you had a Commodore 64, you definitely played Summer Games by Epic. I remember playing this and Summer Games 2 a lot. Beating my old records and the world records. Tons of fun. And just last one to show you real quick, the Bard's Tale 3 Thief of Fate. Awesome dungeon crawler RPG. So that's a lot of the cool stuff in there. I'm going to show you a lot more awesomer stuff in the next video. If you did enjoy this video, please subscribe to the channel. It'll get this channel off the ground, and I really appreciate your support. So tell your friends and family about this channel if they like video games, vintage computer, Commodore 64 stuff. As much as I love it, I hope you love it too. Also, make sure to give the video a thumbs up. And leave comments in the comments section below if you have any questions about the magazines I showed you, or if you just want to share your experience with the nostalgia from the video that I just showed. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'm Brendan, aka Mr. Weaverface. Take care.